right when investors were just trying to work through and get to grips with all these post-budget rules around negative gearing and CGT changes, looks like another door might be closing, this time borrowing inside a self-managed super fund to buy residential investment property. Today, I'm joined by Brent McCartney from DFK BKM and Rikki Juzwin from BKM Wealth to help us try and understand what the heck is going on here. And what does it mean? What's being proposed? What is this whole area of borrowing under SMSFs that might be being shut down? Welcome, Brent, and welcome, Rikki. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem.
Thank you, Simon. So obviously, a lot of people in the results mentoring may be aware of myself as an accountant of choice. But as a firm, DFK and Benjamin Company, got a great advantage of having our own financial planners, which Rikki is one of the financial planners in that group, that we would work around SMSF and retirement. So I thought it was worth bringing him in because of the changes and what he's seen in terms of this moving forward.
It's definitely thrown a spanner in the works, especially for people that have already either considering setting up a fund to purchase property. It's still able to be done though. It is still able, just no borrowing. So if you've already got a large enough balance, then you can still proceed. But it's particularly those people that are already engaging with the mortgage broker and have the fund set up, you've got to move fast because the door is closing on you. Considering doing it and haven't set up the fund and haven't engaged the broker, you're probably, if you can get it set up in time, you're buying a property like that, and fast decisions aren't always good decisions.
No, I agree with that. So before we dive into some of the detail here, just if people have got questions as we go through, by all means, drop a question into the comments. A couple of important points here. This is not specific personal SMSF or financial advice. There's still a lot of detail that's got to come through over the coming days and weeks in the legislation. What today is really about is about what's been announced, what it appears to mean based on the information to hand at this stage, and what we need to be watching, or, in taking Rikki's point, potentially moving quickly on, but a degree of caution here as well. Let's talk about what actually happened this week. So Labor's cut a deal with the Greens to get its broader tax reforms through the Senate. And as part of that, the government has agreed to support a Greens proposed amendment targeting future self-managed super fund borrowing for residential property. So the mechanism, guys, that's being banned here is a thing called limited recourse borrowing arrangements, specifically at this stage at least for residential property through superannuation funds. And this doesn't seem to be just one of those media rumors. This is a deal that's been done behind closed doors that has now come to light, and it was done very quickly. And we do have the expectation that the Senate might pass the legislation through in this sitting fortnight. So this is very, very imminent. So guys, if I can throw to you to start with, what is a limited recourse borrowing arrangement?
Limited recourse. So that means the bank can't come after you. If you default on your loan, there's limited amount of money they can come back. And so it's specifically limited to the property that you've purchased, because a bare trust needs to be set up at the same time within the fund. So lots of complexity going on there. And it's specifically to purchase one investable asset. So that's why a house does work quite well, but it can be, you still can use other investments such as shares. If it's the one investment, you can't be doing a share portfolio of multiple things. Essentially, that's still fine. It's specifically homes, residential property, office properties, and industrial estates. We don't know yet. That could still be available, maybe not. So the government has simply removed an exemption that was previously allowing limited recourse borrowing arrangements to purchase properties with loans.
Now, this hadn't been around forever, had it? It's only about, 15 years old or so?
Yes, it was an exemption that was added in to allow people, and the Greens, there's a very specific exemption that they've just said, we want a big line straight through this one here right now, to what they said, to close a loophole. That's their rationale. They're saying as soon as that, because of all the changes that are happening, they think people are going to start flooding in, setting up self-managed funds, which is a bit far-fetched. Obviously, Labor saw that and gone, look, this is only going to affect a small amount of people, probably not Labor voters particularly as well. So they just said, yeah, you know what, you can have it because we get the capital gains tax changes passed through sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so because Labor doesn't quite have the numbers it would need in the Senate to push its own legislation through, it needs cooperation from one or more of the other parties.
And Liberal would not support that.
So the Greens have seen an opportunity here and been able to get this concession, which has come out of the blue. There hasn't been, I mean, you guys would be more familiar with this than I would be. There hasn't been any real consultation with the industry leading into this at all.
Brent and I were having a meeting on, was it Tuesday morning?
Yeah.
We finished a meeting talking to some potential clients about setting up a fund. The meeting ended. There wasn't talking about LRBAs. Anyway, we're sitting here, the meeting ended, and I said, hey, Brent, have you seen this? I showed him the news announcement, and let's just say, Brent is probably glad that Brent can't say those words here.
And then, but you're giving up, and then an hour later,
Labor said, "Yep, we're doing it."
Which seems to be it's on the wrong legislation, or it was already happening.
I think it was it was done, especially in main reason. Greens also got through the extension to the NDIS, which was probably more what they wanted, but they said we can probably tack this on as well, and we'll get it.
Yes, I know the Greens had been raising this as a concern or something they wanted addressed for several years. I mean, this isn't a new area that they've been pushing, but there's obviously been the opportunity to try and secure that commitment now, which is what appears to have happened. Okay, so what's still protected? So is this retrospective? Does it affect existing arrangements, or are existing arrangements protected under this?
Yeah, I got actually a pretty good summary from a mortgage broker, which is great. And they've said not affected existing residential property LBR. So if you're already in one, similar to the negative gearing changes, similar to they're grandfathered, so they don't change. So if you've already got one set up, you can continue doing that. If you've got contracts signed before the commencement date, so it's protected. They've also said, and this is more of a broker, and this is really where it gets murky, arrangements currently in train. The 45-day window exists precisely for this. So we don't know what that means. Have you thought of it? Have you set up your SMSF? Have you got the lending? Have you got the bare trust and not found the property? That's a little bit, well, what's in train? If I've thought about it and started the process, can I do it? Or I would have thought you've set up the facility and then you're looking for a property, but that still doesn't mean as we said before, that you signed a contract. I think there might be an ability if you bought and started the process, maybe if you set up the fund, but really they've said it's a 45-day window. So 45 days is mid-August. So if you really looked at that, and Simon, you could give us more clarity on that, 45 days is probably generally your settlement period.
Yeah, which comes back down to the devil in the detail here. Is it around the contract date? Is it around settlement? If I've got a contract on a property, but I don't have my finance approved yet, does it come back down to the finance approval date? How's all this going to work? There's a great question from Anthea in the chat here. What would happen to buyers who've committed to an off-the-plan apartment purchase in their SMSF, which won't settle for, say, 2 years from now? How does that work?
Is it in the train? It's a great question. We don't know.
And obviously, like any finance approval you got now would expire by then anyway. You rush stuff through in a couple of hours in an afternoon. None of this detail has been addressed. So we'll see people picking holes in it, as you say. So coming back to the why now, you mentioned before this notion of closing a loophole. So one of the things that had been in the press a little bit, and certainly doing the rounds and advertising on social media, since the budget changes were announced to CGT and negative gearing, a lot of the Spruikers had started to shift their messaging around, well, hey, now it's important to use your SMSF as the loophole around the budget changes so that you can still get concessional taxation, particularly on the CGT side. So a self-managed super fund on capital gains is taxed at what rate, guys?
10% within the first 12 months, but most investments you're holding for longer than 12 months, it's only 10. You get a 30% discount, or 33.
But where super really appealed, that when your super turns into pension mode, where you start drawing the pension out when you have a retirement act or hit 65, currently SMSF super, you've got a zero tax rate.
Guaranteed tax-free returns.
On the income or on the capital gain. So it was a really good addition to your property investing and retirement type situation where you could look at buying that property, maybe working in that meantime, your superannuation's paying down the debt, at retirement either deciding to sell it and reinvest or live off, or if it's somewhat paid off, the income's tax-free. You can draw it out as a pension tax-free.
Yeah, best tax environment in the world. There's nothing better than tax-free. If anyone knows anywhere that pays negative tax, let me know. But I don't think that exists.
Clearly, some in politics are not fans of that idea. They're attempting to close a door here, particularly with respect to using this to reduce the taxable gains on residential property. And it does seem to be a bit of a reaction to the way the Spruikers had gone out there and started shifting their marketing. Now, you could quite easily argue that, well, the right approach to that is if you're concerned about a few Spruikers doing the wrong thing or pushing people into investments that maybe they shouldn't be pushed into, you go the Spruikers, you enforce as ASIC does and as ASIC has done in the past. You don't necessarily try and rip the rug out from underneath an existing established set of policies, but we are where we are. Politics aside, it looks like the Greens at least are trying to bolt the door before the queue forms for the new door that the Spruikers were trying to open in terms of pushing the SMSF investment bandwagon. What does this mean for investors? So if I'm an existing SMSF property investor and I've got a residential property, I've got an LBRA arrangement on that, I've got existing debt, what does this potentially mean for me right now?
If you're already existing, there's no change. You're there, if long as it's working, you're not intending on purchasing another one with an additional loan, you're fine. It's really those people that are considering it at the moment.
What about refinancing? So do you see people typically refinancing their LBRAs on existing properties over time? Like, is that something that generally happens? And how would that work under this?
Yes, that definitely needs to be reconsidered, as everyone's mortgage rate should be considered every 1 to 2 years. But that detail is not yet known.
Okay, so
that's a big question mark on what's going to happen. Banks, they may say, "Cool, you can't refinance. Let's jack those interest rates up because we can make a bit of a profit off it."
And you become a mortgage prisoner inside your super fund.
Yes, and then if your property, if it is negatively geared, well, that means obviously you're tipping in more money to get to pay the mortgage. You've got insurances in there to make sure that in case something happens to you, you're protected. And as you get older, those premiums are going to go up and up. It may come a time when you can't get enough money into the fund quick enough.
All right. What if I had imminent plans to buy a residential property inside my super fund? So I'd been thinking of that. What do I need to be doing now?
You need to be having at least $800,000 in your account now.
Right. And that's beyond the 45 days, right? So if I'm already a few steps down the path, maybe I've got a window to complete it. As you said earlier, though, I shouldn't just be rushing out to buy any old thing just to jam something into super for concessional tax.
I would be saying fast decisions are emotional decisions, and emotional decisions generally are not good financial decisions. Indeed. And you're making that decision off the fear of missing out. That's fear that's driving you to go out there and do it now. And typically, it can be great, but that's assuming that there's no other assets that produce returns. There are other assets, and you should be assessing your options. Property is a part of a portfolio. You still got your cash, you still got your shares. You need to be the diversification of asset classes is incredibly important.
And coming back to the point here that the changes being targeted here appear to be just around buying residential properties. Now, they're not distinguishing between new residential properties or established ones here, unlike some of the other tax changes. So it doesn't matter whether it's a brand new residential property that you'd be buying under your self-managed super fund versus established, you still will lose the ability to use lending, correct?
Correct. There's no differentiate with new and old, which is the reason why they changed the rules is they wanted to encourage new property investment. But this is just flat closing the door, probably just too hard basket, I think.
It doesn't affect, though, at this stage, we don't believe it affects commercial property. So if I wanted to buy a commercial property in my self-managed super fund, at this stage, I'm not barred from getting a loan within the super fund for that. What about the grey area, the in-between types of properties, things like rooming houses, which are residential, but they're kind of a little bit more like a commercial property where it's being rented out by the room under the appropriate regulations, or an NDIS or SDA type of property? Where do they fit? Are they caught up in this as well?
They haven't looked that far into it. I've had a a bit of interest in NDIS property, and in Victoria, obviously we're based in Victoria, there was a requirement to set up a trust to buy an NDIS property.
Yeah.
Now, technically, a super fund is a trust. So I've had a few clients looking at houses, maybe in companies, maybe in their personal name, and the Victorian government said, no, it's got to be a trust. Now, obviously, with the changes to the trust rules, both on the capital gains and the 30 cents tax, a trust might be an appropriate structure for an NDIS property. Like I said, they've just said residential, not residential short-term, long-term. It's
single
just,
dwelling, multi-family unit, nothing.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, exactly right. In terms of rooming housing and things like that, there's always an argument to say, is rooming housing, is NDIS a commercial venture or residential venture? So when we sell, do we sell it as a business or as an asset and getting capital gains tax? So it's always a hard one. At this point in time, we do see NDIS, or I see tax-wise, NDIS rooming houses as a investment, but probably a residential investment, not a commercial residential investment.
Under this, yeah.
If we looked at it, it really quoting business real property. I don't think a rooming house NDIS is really deemed a business real property.
I would say if someone's living there, that's their place where they sleep, I would assume you could say that that's residential.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although in my mind, if I think about this from the finance side of things, when you're financing those kinds of properties, often the lender will look at it more as commercial lending. Yeah. So we've got this awkward little unresolved grey area there in my mind at the moment right now. What about investing in offshore residential assets? Now, I don't know how easy it would be necessarily to get an LRBA loan for an asset that was domiciled offshore within a super fund, but if I could do that, that would presumably be excluded from this as well, yeah?
If I would think if it's residential, yes. But I had a conversation yesterday. It doesn't close the door to utilising super for residential property.
Just the borrowing.
Just the borrowing. Correct.
So obviously one of the options is to buy it outright. Obviously another option is maybe utilising super to minimise the tax on an eventual sale of a residential property. So using as a retirement act that may be close to retirement, selling that residential property in your own name and using super to put the money back into super environment as such. So that is maximising contributions, using the catch-up contributions if you're available to do it.
We'll see what happens over the coming days. But do you think the industry is going to agitate around this in terms of pointing out all the flaws and the gaps in the thinking here?
Definitely. I think there's even the current policies about the tax changes. Brent was just talking about it. All the different things people are picking holes in, or about the divorce or separation.
Yeah, separation and divorce. So now they're saying that joint assets between husband and wife or family members on death may change the capital gains and negative gearing. So it's almost, they put 2 or 3 lines in, and we've now got accounting groups going, what if this scenario, this scenario, this scenario, this scenario? And they're kind of going, oh, I hadn't thought of it, out of thought of it. Even if we look back to Friday, where there was a straight 30% tax on testamentary trusts, some people went, hang on, the testamentary trust is relevant, and they backed out on that. What's interesting is a lot of things are protested, but there's no one protesting in the streets on these tax changes.
Yeah. So we should be all getting our little placards up if we want to invest under our super funds and getting out into the streets.
Well, it might be a more organised or more a different kind of protest march, but there's not. There might be a lot of people on Talkback Radio, but there's not marching in the streets, knocking down Parliament.
Yeah, and that comes down to one of the things to bear in mind here, at least in terms of market impact of this particular issue with SMSFs and residential borrowing, is it's a very, very small part of the overall market. And to some degree, the pollies are using that to try and justify it or trivialize the change, if you like, because the percentage of the market that uses SMSFs for residential borrowing is less than 1% of the total property market in Australia. But obviously, if you are one of those people, then it feels like a much bigger impact because it's directly impacting things like your retirement planning at the moment. I don't want to trivialize it for those who are using this as a strategy, but in terms of general market impact, unlikely to have a big impact on the property market. It's certainly not going to really affect affordability, but it won't really affect pricing in and of itself. More of an impact on those who are using it, more of an impact perhaps on buyers' agents that have a lot of clients who might be using this strategy or might have been planning to use this strategy. Again, an unforeseen consequence that hasn't really been thought about, I suspect, by the powers that be. But the broader market itself, I think, will not really be impacted that much by this. A few things I think we need to watch next, and that would be obviously what does happen with the industry backlash at the moment and to what extent that shapes the final details here. We want to see the detail, right? So what does the final amendment actually look like? When does it actually start? How do those transitional rules for contracts and finance approvals and settlements and longer term off the plan situations actually work under this? And I think an important one for those who already have residential borrowing under their self-managed super fund is what happens with refinancing. That hasn't, as far as we can tell, hasn't been addressed at all yet. And just making sure that things like our understanding of commercial property, still being able to borrow for commercial property under self-managed super funds, does actually stand up as this works its way through. What we haven't really seen yet, unless you guys are starting to see it on the ground, is how the lenders respond to this and how they respond to it during the transitional period, whether they just shut things down, whether they still process those loan approvals, how it's going to work. So there's a few things we need to keep an eye on here. I do want to come back, and if you guys are around next week or the week after, perhaps we'll do a session on death and taxes and talk about how some of these changes are highlighting potential issues around how all that's going to work. So it'd be great if you guys are available to get you guys back on for that. In the meantime, if people want to reach out and get in touch with you, how can they best do that?
You can contact me through Brent if you've already met Brent. If not, after this, Simon, I'll provide you with my contact details and you can pass them on. Benjamin King Money Wealth, BKM Wealth is the company I work for. You'll be able to find us there. Send me an email. Happy to have a chat.
Quick question before we wrap. What about if you've got an SMSF that is maybe in partnership or joint venture with another entity, another SMSF or other entity, and it doesn't have any borrowing, but it has a share in, say, a unit trust or a company that's holding a property, doing a project on it or something like that? That doesn't really relate to borrowing inside the self-managed super fund, does it? So it wouldn't really be affected by this.
That's all fine. Unchanged.
Excellent. All right. I do want to thank you guys so much for spending the time with us today and helping us try and navigate what can be quite a confusing time at the moment with these sudden shifts and changes. So thanks so much for your time today, guys, and look forward to getting you on again in the not too distant future. For those who are new to our real estate success community, welcome. Hope you've enjoyed today's session. Make sure you have completed your profile, answer the icebreaker question, jump onto the connect and discuss space, share what you're up to, ask questions of others, and really engage with the community. That's how you'll get the most out of it. Check out the recent replays of these fireside chats and other webinars and resources that we've got on the platform. And of course, get into the upcoming event space, RSVP for the upcoming fireside chats and other events that we've got going on. But welcome aboard. Final thought from me, you've got to bring back your investing strategy to why you're investing. Don't build your investing strategy around so-called loopholes and tax concessions. By all means, legally minimize your tax wherever you can, but build your investing around the profit fundamentals, not the tax savings that you might be able to get. And of course, especially in this space, always get proper advice before making your SMSF and other investing decisions. Guys, that's Property Pulse for this week. We'll be back next Thursday, same time. Thanks, guys, for all of your input today, and we'll see you all again soon. Cheers.
Thanks.